It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started.
Well, hello, everyone. Monica from my recent class asked me specifically. She said that she went to my podcast site, she searched the episodes, and she couldn't find anything on technical debt. Now, I know I've probably done a technical debt episode before, but I thought that I would give it a quick review. And hopefully, for those of you who understand technical debt, you'll still get something out of this because I'm going to go a lot deeper than just defects or bugs. So, with that being said, one of the first things we need to understand about technical debt is that there's two types of technical debt. There's intentional technical debt and unintentional technical debt. So, intentional technical debt means we consciously made a decision to put off something that we should be doing today in order to do something different, to get something out of the door. And what I can tell you is that this is very dangerous. It's toxic. Many companies do it. It is one of those situations where you see the writing on the wall, but you're still going to do it anyway. Now, there is some good that comes with it because it allows you to get to market faster. It allows you to create that feedback loop faster, but it's certainly toxic in the sense that we know there's more that needs to be done, but we're tabling it knowing that we're going to have to take up or make up for it later. And that is the struggle. That's the hard part. Unintentional technical debt is a little bit different. Unintentional technical debt means that we have changes that have been made that are outside of our control. Now, when I say outside of our control, I'm talking like changes to Amazon Web Services or changes to something that breaks what we have created. And those are not as common, but they do still happen, especially if you're using any web services or things like that. So, what I'm trying to say is, or if you're relying on a third party vendor, right, and their tools. So, oftentimes these impacts are caused by things that are outside of our control, and that's considered unintentional debt. But I think the focus that Monaco was looking for was to talk about the seven deadly sins of technical debt. Now, all of you know, I've written a document, it's published, it's great, and it talks about these seven things. Now, what's interesting is they're not all. I'll even go here. They're not all technical. So even though I call it technical debt, these things create debt that causes technical issues. So let's start. Let's start at the top and see how many we can get done in one podcast episode. So the first one is unintended features. This is probably one of the most obvious ones. This is when the team overbuilds or over architects or over creates something. You ask them for something simple. My example in a little booklet is the team has decided, the product ownership and the stakeholders decided that they needed a toaster. And they created a toaster, but it looks like a giant robot and it's got slices for bread, but it says, somebody's asking about it. And the guy's like, yeah, and it cleans your house and it fights crime and it searches for buried treasure. It'll help you find true love. It's like, what are you building, right? I think that the consequence here, because many people they say, well, isn't that better when you get additional features that surprise or wow the customer? What I can tell you is that the piece that most people don't think about is the maintenance part of this. That once you build all those extra features, then it's going to be time for you to maintain those features. And people just don't think that far ahead. So if I asked you for a Fiat and you built a Ferrari, people don't consider the difference in cost and the oil change between Jiffy Lube and the Ferrari dealership changing my oil because it's almost impossible to change the oil in a Ferrari without taking apart part of the engine, right? It's just one of those things where sometimes keeping it on track, doing a simple approach, getting something out there and getting feedback is better than trying to overbuild. There, I said it. All right, coming in at number two, poorly designed architecture. We sort of hinted at this. This is where the team decides. I'll give you an example. So we have two different types of architecture we'll talk about. One is called steel thread architecture, and the other one is called scarecrow architecture. Now, scarecrow architecture, I like to refer to the Wizard of Oz. If you remember the Wizard of Oz, there was a reason why the witch loved the scarecrow because he always could burn. He got burned easily, yes? when you build haphazard architecture without regard for what the future could hold, and you're just whipping it together to get something out the door, sometimes you're making brainless decisions and stuffing a whole bunch of what if code or what if architecture, thinking you might need it later or you might need something more. And what you quickly discover is that while you're dancing and moving around, everybody had to stuff it with more straw. That's the stuffed architecture. And what you discover is that you're making poor choices and you're going to get burned at some point on architecture and have to completely re engineer, rebuild what you have, especially if it comes to integration with APIs or with other products or services. Steel thread architecture, on the other hand, is the story of the Golden Gate Bridge. While they may not have had a laser to measure across to get everything exactly perfect, they certainly extended a steel thread all the way across the span in order to accurately measure the distance so that they could have everything perfect when they were creating that bridge. And that one steel thread eventually became one of the modern architectural miracles. So, what I'm trying to say is if you start small and only build and add as you need, get in the habit of creating emergent architecture. It'll help you control what's going on, repurpose built architecture that's already there, and really give you keys to successfully achieve basic goals and then leverage more advanced things later. Just don't overdo it, right? Okay. Number three, a lack of product backlog management and inappropriate visibility. Now, this one's interesting. When we talk about product backlog management, one of the things I talk about is the number of projects that a product owner has in motion, products or projects. The truth is, the fewer we have in motion, the more we're going to get completed and the better things are going to turn out. If we have too many plates spinning at the same time, too many things in motion, we're not going to get value. The other piece of this is making sure that we're not exposing, the next 19,731 items we're going to work on. Because the truth is, beyond what you're working on right now and a couple of sprints out, nobody knows what the rest of the future is going to hold. New ideas will be introduced. The consumer will think of new ideas. Stakeholders will want new things. We'll discover new technologies that have us pivot. There's so many things that could potentially happen. We need to make sure that we're managing the backlog in such a way that people can easily read it, easily consume it, easily understand what it is. Shouldn't be more than a couple of hundred items. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're saying, Lee, if that's true, then what do we do with the rest of those items? Where do we put all the rest of the stuff we're working on? And that answer is quite interesting. If you have additional items, you should keep something called a product owner backlog, where it contains all the whims, ideas, wants, needs, desires, things that may or may not make it into the product. And then as you go through, you can introduce those new things to the product. That's going to be an easy way to keep things organized, right? You want to keep things organized. Even in an enterprise organization, you want to keep your backlog somewhat small. Okay. Next one's outdated defects and bugs. Now, I remember I went to an organization and I said, "Oh, we're heavily regulated and we take pride in keeping all of our bugs around. That way we have a record, a system of record that shows whether or not we fix things and what's going on." And I asked him if it was absolutely necessary, and we pulled up one of their oldest bugs, and I'll never forget it. It said, "Page does not display correctly in Netscape Navigator." Scare me to death, right? But what I can tell you is I after I screened everyone to see if anyone had an America Online disk I could borrow to see if I could find a copy of Netscape Navigator to test it. Of course, I'm kidding. It was just one of those things where I'm like, how far do we need to go back? When do we archive things? When do we mark things as known but not resolved? How do we get past this state of infinite defects? And the answer is, I usually call this severe defect triage. And here's how it works. If you have a defect triage session, you should be able to decide right away when a new defect comes in. Is it something that needs to be addressed right this moment? Is it something that deserves to be promoted to be the first item in our next sprint? Or is it something that we are not exactly going to address? And even though that sounds silly, many organizations make that decision and they mark these items known but not resolved and they archive them. They don't delete them. Then, if the issue comes up again, they'll address it with a VIP status. Or if it doesn't come up again, chances are, we have to understand that The end user may have found a suitable workaround, or you may have inadvertently fixed it when you're fixing something else, or it really wasn't that big of a deal, or it wasn't really an issue. It was an enhancement disguised as an issue. The truth is, based on what type of products or service we build, we need to understand risk tolerance and be able to decide where to draw the line of what we're going to do. Okay, coming in next is a lack of automated testing. Now, I say this all the time. If you're running every single test manually, every single sprint, and you continue down that path, you are going to fail. Things are not going to work out in your favor. If you're talking about unit testing, yeah, get that to 100%, 100% automation if you can. But if you're talking about regression testing, only set up automation or optimization for tests that are more than just run once, for tests that you run multiple times. If you do this, it's going to help you really get a better understanding of how your testing functions. It's going to cost a little more upfront, but the real answer is anytime you're incorporating automation or optimization, it's really going to work out to be in your favor. Okay, coming up next is a lack of good coding standards. Now, what I can tell you is most of the time organizations have a loose coding standard. What I'm saying is, and I like to call this man on a street or developer on a street. Let me put it this way. If any developer walks in and she looks at your code and she doesn't understand exactly what you're trying to do, that's bad. I'm not saying you need full documentation, but what I am saying is you have some documentation, something that everything's written in the same format. Everything's easy to read. It's easy for someone to pick up where you left off and understand exactly where you are. If you refer to like example marketing, most marketing departments have guidelines for what our email signature should look like, or when we should use company logos and how, or what color schemes we should use. This is the same thing for developers. It's just a way to keep things clean and tidy to make sure everyone's doing the right thing. Okay. And when I'm talking about testing, it's pretty much the same thing too, because I often talk about testing standards as well. Tests should be written very similarly, and every test should be written in a way that any mere mortal can go in and execute that test and see what the expected results should be. And finally, to round out our 7, a lack of proper refactoring or peer review. This is where you have these experts who are hoarding their goodness and saying, I took years to learn this. Why should I share it with everyone else? And they are the people who come in to work late every day. They park their Hummer sideways across all the pregnancy and handicap parking spots and electric vehicle parking spots just because they can. They have a corner office that's not big enough for their ego. I think you know who I'm talking about, right? And these people just will not accept that more than one set of eyes should look at what they do. The truth is, every single person should have more than every single piece of code should have more than one set of eyes look at it. And every person should work together to make sure that we're not building silos. And this is one that I see more times than not, and people don't realize just how big of a deal this is. If you're not doing peer reviews, if you're not doing pairing, if you're not doing some type of refactoring older code to bring it up to date and get it somewhat documented so it follows a coding standard, this is going to catch up to you and haunt you, right? The guy who sits in a corner office with 9 monitors, looks like the Starship Enterprise. You can't have that guy running the show. You need to make sure the team has comfort and that they know what's going on and that we're taking time to break down all those complex things into things that are easily consumable so that going forward in the future, we can work on them. So there you have it. That's a review of technical debt. It's not as intense as I'd love for it to be, but it's definitely done within 15 minutes. If you have a topic you'd like for us to cover or talk about, feel free to reach out to us at learnmore@agiledad.com. We'd love to hear about your topic. As always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile. Thanks for the idea, Monica. Until next time, do take care.